My name is Sarah Miller, and I'm a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. I've spent most of my adult life in a uniform, not because I felt I had to prove anything, but because service was just part of my family. My father, Captain Robert Miller, spent 35 years in the Navy. He used to say the ocean was the only thing that really listened. I used to believe him. But that night, the night of his retirement party, I learned the ocean wasn't the only thing that could make you feel small. It was a Saturday evening at the Norfolk Officers Club, the kind of large hall that smelled like polished wood, sea air, and history. The walls were covered with framed pictures of ships and men in clean white uniforms, frozen in time. I had been to many Navy ceremonies before, but this one was different. This one was for him, and I had paid for all of it: the food, the string quartet, even the engraved glass decanter they would give him at the end. The room was bright under the chandeliers as 300 guests, including officers, spouses, and retired servicemen, found their tables. My father looked sharp in his full dress whites, his medals catching the light. He moved through the room like he was still in charge, shaking hands, laughing loudly, and accepting compliments for his long career. When he spotted me near the back of the room, he gave me a polite nod, the kind you give a junior officer, not your daughter. I stood there holding a glass of water. It's an old habit. I don't drink alcohol. I smiled at his guests. They didn't know I had paid for the party. My father had simply told everyone, the Navy takes care of its own. I suppose it was just easier for him to let people think that. Pride, I've learned, has a way of changing the truth. The speeches began after dinner. His old colleagues stood up to share stories about their time at sea, the storms they faced, and the missions they completed. Laughter moved through the room. I was truly proud. Whatever his personal faults, my father had served this country with dedication and sacrifice. I clapped along with everyone else. Then it was his turn. He stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and smiled that confident smile I had seen sadness in 1,000 times. You know, he started, 35 years in uniform teaches you a lot about discipline, leadership, and humility. People chuckled softly. He continued. It also teaches you that not everyone is cut out for this life. Some folks are better suited for support roles. A few heads turned to look at me, and my stomach tightened. He went on, take my daughter, for instance. She followed in my footsteps. God bless her, though. The Navy looks a little different these days. Paperwork, joint operations, computers. Not the kind of Navy we knew, huh? A few people laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. Just a polite one, as if they weren't sure if he was joking. But my father's grin told them it was. I smiled too. It was the kind of tight-lipped smile that hides feeling hurt. He wasn't finished. They tell me she's got some kind of fancy position with NATO, logistics or something. I guess it's what they call progress, letting the ladies push the buttons while the men used to push the boats. The laughter was louder this time. It echoed in the big room. I felt my face get warm. Every instinct from my years of command told me to stand up, salute, and leave. But I stayed seated with perfect posture, my eyes fixed on the flag behind him. Let him have his night, I told myself. When the laughter stopped, my father lifted his glass. To the next generation, he said, may they find their own way to serve. Even if it's behind a desk. People applauded. And then a voice from across the room broke the rhythm. It was a deep, steady voice that sounded surprised. Captain Miller, it said. Did you just say Sarah Miller? Heads turned. At table 3 sat Admiral James Peterson, a retired fleet commander and a man my father had served under years ago. He was older now, with gray hair and a chest full of medals that told their own stories. He was staring at me. Yes, my father replied lightly. My daughter here, Commander Miller. She keeps busy with NATO or something like that. The Admiral set his glass down, his face changed. His eyes widened like he had just recognized someone. Commander Sarah Miller, he repeated, this time louder. My father frowned. That's right. Why? The Admiral almost choked. He looked at me, then back at my father. Sir, may I say something? The room went completely still. My father hesitated, then nodded. The Admiral stood, his voice carrying authority even in retirement. Captain Miller, he said with respect, Your daughter isn't just some logistics officer. She led Operation Swift Resolve, the NATO rescue during the Kiev evacuation. She commanded the mission that saved 42 Allied lives under enemy fire. I was there. She was in command. Gasps rippled through the audience. Someone dropped a fork and it clattered loudly in the silence. My father froze at the podium, the color draining from his face. The admiral looked directly at me. "Commander Miller, ma'am, it's an honor to finally meet you in person." For a second, I couldn't breathe. I nodded slowly, quietly. Then the admiral turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this officer's leadership saved my team. We owe her our lives." Silence. A heavy, respectful silence. My father's hand trembled on the podium. The same man who'd spent years dismissing my service now stood speechless, surrounded by the applause of people who finally saw me for who I was. And that's when I saw it. His eyes were glistening, his jaw shaking slightly as he looked at me. He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. I didn't need an apology. That moment said everything. To understand how we reached that night, the pride, the bitterness, and the silence that became love again, you need to know what happened 2 years earlier. After that night, people often asked what kind of man my father was. The truth is, he wasn't a villain. He was just a man born in a world where women weren't expected to stand on the same deck, shoulder to shoulder with men. He was a Navy officer through and through, shaped by the Cold War, by duty, by a code that demanded command and control. In his world, emotions were liabilities, not tools. And daughters, no matter how capable, were meant to marry soldiers, not become them. Growing up in Norfolk, Virginia meant growing up surrounded by the Navy. The sound of ships' horns in the harbor was as familiar to me as church bells on Sunday. My earliest memories were of standing on the pier, watching my father's destroyer cut through the water, white spray glinting in the sun. I'd wave until the ship disappeared over the horizon. When I was 10, my mother passed away from breast cancer. That was when Dad's voice became sharper, his patience thinner. Without Mom's kindness to balance him, he turned fully into Captain Miller. Even at home, orders replaced conversations. Silence replaced affection. He remarried 2 years later, a woman named Helen, who had a son from a previous marriage, David. David was older than me by a few years, loud and confident. Dad adored him instantly. When David joined the Naval Academy, my father swelled with pride. He bragged to anyone who would listen. "My boy's going to wear the uniform one day." When I enlisted, there was no such announcement. He didn't come to my graduation from the Naval Academy. He sent a 2-line note that read, "Congratulations. Remember, the Navy needs followers too." I learned early that if I wanted respect from him, I'd have to earn it twice. Once as a sailor, and again as a woman. The first time I told him I'd passed the physical screening for special operations training, he laughed. "Sarah, those guys are killers. You're too soft. Leave that to men who can handle it." I wasn't soft. I'd spent my teenage years running laps around the base, training until my hands bled, learning how to keep up in a world that didn't expect me to. I pushed through boot camp injuries, field tests, and survival drills. When I made it into a joint operations unit under NATO command, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally see me. But when I came home after my first deployment, his only question was, "So, are you done playing soldier now?" That was the rhythm of our relationship. Small victories, smaller acknowledgments. My father respected results, but he couldn't accept that I'd achieved mine without needing him. For a man like him, authority was identity, and his daughter's independence looked too much like defiance. Over the years, I learned to read his silences. When he said, "You look tired," he meant, "You're wasting your time." When he said, "Be careful," he meant, "You shouldn't be there." When he said, "That's impressive," he meant, "I still don't believe it." And I kept trying anyway. When my stepbrother David graduated and got a staff post at the Pentagon, my father threw him a dinner at the club. Toasts, speeches, laughter. He called him my legacy. When I was promoted to lieutenant commander, my father sent a text that said, "Congrats, keep your head down." It would have been easy to grow bitter, but the truth was, I still wanted his approval. It wasn't about pride, it was about connection. That primal need to hear your parents say, "I'm proud of you." During one rare phone call, I told him I'd been selected for a NATO operations post in Europe. That's a big deal, I said, cautiously hopeful. He grunted. Those desk jobs are for career politicians, not warriors. Don't let them turn you into one of them. I remember staring at my reflection after hanging up. The medals, the ribbons, the rank pins, wondering what more I could possibly do to make him see me. Still, I went to Brussels. I worked with some of the best officers in the world. We coordinated missions that saved lives. We built alliances that actually mattered. My team respected me. The men called me ma'am with genuine regard, not because they had to. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter of Captain Miller. I was Commander Miller in my own right. But pride is a strange thing. Even when you rise, part of you stays small, the child still waiting for a nod from the man who taught you what strength was supposed to look like. Then came the news. After 35 years, Captain Robert Miller was retiring. Helen called me first. He's planning a big event at the Officers Club, she said. All his friends, old commanders, even Admiral Peterson might attend. He's excited. I asked if she needed help with arrangements. She hesitated. Well, to be honest, he hasn't exactly set aside funds for it. He assumed the Navy would handle it, but those benefits aren't what they used to be. I could have left it at that, but something inside me, duty, maybe love, pushed me to offer. I'll cover it quietly. Just make sure it's everything he wants. Helen exhaled with relief. Sarah, that's very generous. Generous. The word stung. It wasn't generosity. It was longing. The last attempt of a daughter trying to give her father one more reason to be proud. I told her to keep my involvement discreet. The money came from my savings, hard-earned bonuses, and overseas pay. Every dollar felt worth it if it bought even a moment of his respect. 2 weeks before the event, I called him. Dad, I hear the club's ready for your big night, he chuckled. You heard right. They say the Navy's footing most of the bill. Guess they still remember who carried the load around here. I swallowed hard. Yeah, I guess they do. That was my father, incapable of letting someone else share the light. Still, I promised myself I wouldn't indecipherable let pride ruin the night. I told myself I was done needing his validation. But when the night came, when he stood before that crowd and turned my career into a punchline, every old wound reopened. And yet I didn't stand up. I didn't shout. I just smiled because I knew something he didn't. That respect doesn't need to be demanded. It only needs to be earned. And soon enough, he'd learn that lesson too. The thing about the Navy is that it teaches you how to endure. Storms don't ask for your permission. They test you. And you either learn to steady the ship or you sink with it. I learned early on that surviving in uniform, especially as a woman, meant knowing when to fight and when to stay silent. My first deployment under NATO command changed everything. We were stationed in Eastern Europe during a rising regional conflict, a mix of political tension and chaos that the news back home barely covered. Officially, my title was Logistics Operations Officer. Unofficially, I was the person who made sure nobody died waiting for orders that came too late. Our base wasn't glamorous, gray concrete, leaky ceilings, and the constant hum of generators, but my team was solid. Men and women from 5 different countries, all exhausted, all proud. They respected results, not gender, and that made all the difference. One winter night, a joint convoy carrying medical supplies was ambushed in a mountain pass outside Kiev. Communications went dark. The snow was coming down in thick sheets, and the local forces were disorganized. The commanding officer hesitated, saying we needed higher clearance before deploying a rescue team. I couldn't wait for that. I remember standing in the operations tent, the radio hissing with static and realizing that waiting would cost lives. So I made a decision, a reckless, career-defining, necessary decision. Scramble Delta Team, I said. We move now. The men hesitated. Ma'am, that order has to come from ADC. I am the order, I said. Move. By dawn, we'd retrieved 22 wounded soldiers and 4 civilians. By mid-morning, the convoy survivors were calling us angels. By noon, the chain of command was demanding to know who authorized the mission. When Admiral James Peterson, then commander of the entire NATO Joint Operations Task Group, flew in for debriefing, I expected a reprimand. Instead, he studied me for a long moment, then said, "Next time, at least wait until I give you permission. You'll get it eventually." That was his way of saying, good job. The official report said, exceptional leadership under pressure. The unofficial truth was that we'd broken protocol to save lives. It earned me a commendation and a reputation, the kind that travels quietly through the ranks, the kind that makes certain people respect you and others resent you. When I came home months later, my father didn't ask about it. He'd read the sanitized version in the Navy bulletin, but dismissed it. Sounds like you were just lucky, he said over dinner. Lucky? That word echoed in my head for weeks. I stopped trying to impress him after that. I poured myself into work instead. Promotions came, awards followed. My name appeared in classified cables, but never on TV, never in headlines. I liked it that way. The real victories don't need applause. Still, every time I visited home, I could feel the distance. My stepmother would ask polite questions about Europe while my father talked endlessly about David's new desk job at the Pentagon. I'd sit there smiling, listening to stories about real Navy men, while my medals stayed tucked away in a box in my closet. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something quieter, resignation mixed with sadness. You can't force someone to see you if they've already decided who you are. Then came the mission that changed everything. 2 years before his retirement, I was stationed at the U.S. Naval Base in Rota, Spain, coordinating NATO fleet logistics. It was supposed to be routine. Then came word of an explosion at a civilian shipping port just north of the base, a terrorist attack that left dozens injured, several missing. The next 72 hours blurred into chaos. We worked without sleep, coordinating rescue operations with Spanish authorities. My team found a pattern in the transport records, evidence of a second planned strike. We relayed the intel up the chain, and within hours, a second attack was prevented. It was later called Operation Swift Resolve, the same mission Admiral Peterson mentioned that night at the party. But the details never made public release. Too sensitive, too politically charged. All I got was a quiet commendation handed over in a closed briefing room for exemplary conduct in the preservation of life and defense of Allied forces. When the ceremony ended, Peterson shook my hand. Commander Miller, he said, you don't need people to know your name for your work to matter. The right people already do. I carried that with me. Back home, though, none of it mattered. The Navy grapevine didn't reach Norfolk dinner tables. My father still thought I pushed papers. I don't understand how you can call that combat service to us, he said once. You're not even on ships anymore. I didn't argue. There was no point. At his retirement announcement, he gave a speech at the local VFW hall. I stood in the back, clapping as everyone cheered for him. Then during his toast, he mentioned his children. My son David, who's serving at the Pentagon, and my daughter, who's somewhere in NATO, I think. People laughed. He smiled. I told myself it didn't hurt, but it did. Later that night, when I dropped him off at home, he thanked me for attending. You know, he said, staring out the windshield, you'd make a fine administrative officer one day. You've got that detail-oriented brain. I forced a smile. Sure, Dad. In that moment, something in me shifted. Not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet resolve. If he wanted to see me as small, I'd let him until the truth was too big to ignore. When the Navy later confirmed his official retirement ceremony at the Norfolk Officers Club, I offered to handle logistics. He assumed the Navy was paying for everything. I didn't correct him. It wasn't about revenge. It was about giving him the night he'd earned and giving myself one last chance to see whether he could still change. But deep down, I already knew the answer. He'd only see me when someone else forced him to look. 2 months before my father's retirement ceremony, I flew back to Virginia. It felt strange being home after so many years overseas. Norfolk always smelled like salt and diesel, the scent of every departure and return. My stepmother, Helen, met me at the door of their tidy colonial home. Sarah, she said, smiling tightly, you look so grown up, still keeping that haircut. I smiled back. Regulations don't change much. Inside, the house hadn't changed either. My father's medals lined the hallway like family portraits. Photos of him shaking hands with admirals, standing beside destroyers, and saluting at sunrise filled the walls. My picture, my official commissioning photo, hung in a corner, slightly crooked, half hidden behind a potted plant. I straightened it quietly when no one was looking. We sat in the kitchen sipping coffee while Helen ran through the plans. "Your father's been working on his speech," she said. He wants it to feel personal. You know how he is. The Navy is his real family." I forced a polite laugh. "Yeah, I know." She hesitated before lowering her voice. "He doesn't know you're covering the costs, right?" "Correct," I said. Let's keep it that way." She nodded, grateful. "You're being very generous." Generous, the word again. It felt like a paper medal. Polite, thin, unearned. Later that night, I found my father in the garage polishing the brass trim on an old sea chest. "Thought I'd find you here," I said. He looked up briefly. "Couldn't sleep. Big night coming up. You ready for your speech?" "My speech?" He shrugged. "You'll probably want to say something, right? Family and all that. Keep it short, though. People didn't come to hear war stories from you." I bit my tongue. "Noted." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile commanders use to dismiss junior officers. "Don't take it personally, Sarah. These events are about tradition, not self-promotion. You understand that?" "I do," I said softly. "Perfectly." He didn't notice the sting behind my voice. The next morning, I drove to the officers' club to confirm details. The event coordinator, a polite woman named Karen, showed me the layout. "We've got the Navy Band Quartet, buffet service for 300 and the slideshow. You requested photos of your father through the years." "Good," I said. "Keep it formal, no gimmicks." Karen smiled. "You must be proud of him." I nodded. "I am." She didn't need to know the rest. She didn't need to know that the account number on the payment file was mine, that the floral arrangements, the champagne, and even the engraved invitations from the Officers Club in honor of Captain Robert Miller had come from my budget. 2 weeks later, the RSVPs poured in. Old shipmates, retired commanders, even Admiral James Peterson's office replied, "Attending." When I saw his name, something inside me flickered. I hadn't spoken to him since that mission years ago. I wondered if he even remembered me. The day before the event, I stopped by to drop off the final invoice. My father was sitting at the kitchen table scribbling on note cards. He looked up as I entered. "Everything ready?" "Everything's set," I said. The club looks great." He grinned. "They've really gone all out. Must be spending a fortune. Guess the Navy still knows how to honor its own." I smiled faintly. "Guess so." He chuckled, unaware. "You know, they should have had someone like you organizing my command ceremonies. You've always been good with details." That was his version of a compliment. Helen appeared in the doorway, her hands clasped. "Robert, don't forget to mention Sarah in your speech. She's been working hard, too." He waved a hand dismissively. "Of course I'll mention her. Something like, 'My daughter who works with NATO paperwork.' That should do." I froze. NATO paperwork? That's what my service had been reduced to. Paper. Helen noticed my expression. "Robert," she said gently. "She's an officer, remember?" He looked at me, half smiling. I know. Commander Miller, I just mean, she's not front line anymore. Still, it's good she's keeping busy." I exhaled slowly through my nose, willing myself to stay calm. "Right," I said. "Keeping busy." He returned to his notes without looking up. "Anyway, you'll be sitting up front with the family. Try not to look too serious. You know how you get when you're nervous." "I'm not nervous, Dad," I said quietly. "Not anymore." The morning of the event, I woke early and ironed my dress uniform. It wasn't the same as his. Mine carried the insignia of a Joint Command Officer, 2 silver bars glinting under the light. The medals felt heavier that day, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented, years of service he'd never acknowledged. As I drove to the Officers Club, I passed rows of white ships docked in the harbor. The American flag fluttered against a soft coastal breeze. I thought about all the times I'd saluted that flag and how many times I'd wished he could see me doing it. Inside the ballroom, staff rushed to finalize settings, blue and gold linens, crystal centerpieces, the Navy SEAL projected on a large screen behind the stage. I checked everything twice, adjusting the angle of the podium mic, making sure his name was spelled correctly on the banner. Karen approached me nervously. "Commander Miller, the Admiral's aide just called. He'll be sitting at table 3. I nodded, a quiet current of adrenaline passing through me. "Thank you." As guests began to arrive, I took a seat near the back, blending into the crowd. The music played, the chatter filled the air, my father greeted everyone like a conquering hero. For a while, I actually felt proud seeing how people admired him, how his stories filled the room with laughter. Then, during dinner, one of his old shipmates leaned toward him and said, "Robert, your daughter looks sharp in that uniform. Must be following in your footsteps." My father laughed. "Something like that. She does NATO desk work, paperwork, planning. You know how it is these days. Less grit, more laptops." The table chuckled. My jaw clenched. But I said nothing because I'd already made my choice. I wouldn't defend myself tonight. The truth would do that for me. And as fate would have it, the man sitting quietly at table 3, the retired admiral I hadn't seen in years, was about to make sure everyone in that room finally heard it. The speeches began right after dessert. The Navy band shifted into a soft instrumental version of Anchors Aweigh while servers cleared the plates. My father's old executive officer took the stage first, reminiscing about deployment storms and Captain Miller's legendary temper. Laughter filled the hall again. Even I laughed. He wasn't wrong. Then it was my father's turn. He walked to the podium with the steady gait of a man still accustomed to command. The room quieted as he adjusted the microphone, glancing down at his cards before beginning. 35 years, he said, voice firm and proud. That's a lot of ocean, a lot of faces, a lot of lessons learned. I've seen the Navy change for better and for worse. These days, it's less about muscle and more about management. But no matter what, it's still the greatest service on Earth. Applause. He smiled, soaking it in. He went on to thank his commanding officers, his shipmates, and the Navy wives who kept everything afloat back home. Then came the line I'll never forget. "And of course, my family," he said, turning slightly toward our table. "My wife, Helen, she's been the calm in every storm, and my children. My son, David, working up in D.C., keeping the Pentagon in line." The crowd laughed politely. "And my daughter, Sarah. She's done well for herself, too. Some kind of NATO logistics thing." A few people chuckled. He grinned, encouraged. "Yeah," he continued. "They tell me she's a commander now. I guess they hand those out pretty easily these days." The laughter was louder this time. I felt it like shrapnel. I kept my smile. I'd learned how to do that in uniform, to keep composure even when the wind knocks the air out of your lungs. He wasn't finished. "I'll tell you," he said, leaning on the podium, "the Navy sure has changed since my day. Back then, we earned our stripes by getting our hands dirty. These days, you can get promoted for knowing how to use PowerPoint." The room roared. I heard someone near me say, "That's true, Captain." Helen looked mortified. She touched his arm, whispering something. He waved her off. "Come on, it's just a joke," he said into the mic. "You've got to keep things light, right?" Then he raised his glass. "To the next generation, even if they spend more time in meetings than at sea." Applause again. I forced a breath. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I thought about standing up, about walking out, but then a voice, steady, clear, broke through the noise. "Captain Miller?" It was coming from the middle of the room. Table 3. Admiral James Peterson, retired, was rising to his feet. His uniform was immaculate, white jacket, medals gleaming. The years hadn't softened his authority. Even silence seemed to obey him. "Did you say Commander Sarah Miller?" His tone wasn't casual. It was the clipped, precise voice of someone verifying coordinates before a strike. My father blinked, thrown off. Yes, my daughter. Why?" The Admiral straightened, eyes locked on me. "Commander Miller from NATO, the one who led Operation Swift Resolve." A murmur rippled across the room. My father frowned. "I'm sure it's a different operation," he said quickly, attempting a chuckle. "Sarah's in planning, not—" The Admiral cut him off. "No, sir, I know exactly who she is." You could hear the air shift. He turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time we all understand exactly who's in this room. He looked at me again, and for a heartbeat, I thought about shaking my head, asking him not to continue, but I didn't. He cleared his throat. 2 years ago, during Operation Swift Resolve, a NATO supply convoy was ambushed outside Kiev. 42 Allied soldiers trapped under enemy fire with communications down. Command was paralyzed. One officer, took initiative and led an unauthorized rescue that saved every surviving member of that convoy. Gasps. Chairs creaked. My father's hand tightened on the podium. The admiral's voice carried like it was back on the deck of a carrier. That officer was Commander Sarah Miller. I was on the command channel when she made that call. She risked her career and her life because she refused to let men die waiting for permission. And I can tell you now, NATO's board reviewed her actions and called it one of the finest displays of leadership under fire they'd ever seen. Silence. He looked at me, his voice softening. Commander Miller, it's an honor to finally meet you in person. Every head turned my way. Some guests began to clap, quietly at first, then louder. A few stood. The sound grew until it filled the entire hall. My father stood frozen, his face pale. The admiral turned back to him. Captain Miller, he said, you should be proud. You raised one hell of a leader. My father tried to smile, but it faltered. He glanced down at the microphone, then back at me. For the first time, I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, but confusion, the kind that comes when the ground shifts beneath you. The applause lasted a long time. I didn't stand, I didn't speak, I just nodded once at the admiral, a quiet thank you. When the crowd settled, my father stepped back to the podium. His voice cracked slightly. Well, he said, forcing a small laugh. Looks like I've been out of the loop. A few people chuckled nervously. He tried again, softer this time. Sarah, I didn't realize. I smiled politely. That's okay, Dad. He stared at me for a long moment, then cleared his throat. To my daughter, he said finally, lifting his glass again. To Commander Miller. The room erupted in applause once more, louder than before, but this time, the laughter was gone. It was respect. As people clapped, I saw him turn away slightly, blinking hard. The strong, unshakable Captain Miller, the man who'd mocked my service a moment ago, was now gripping the edge of the podium, his jaw trembling. Helen reached for his arm. He brushed her hand away gently, lowering his head. I could see the tears he didn't want anyone else to see. The admiral returned to his seat. Before sitting, he leaned toward me and whispered, Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought overseas, Commander. I nodded. Yes, sir. He smiled faintly. But you won this one. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to exhale. After the applause faded and the music resumed, I sat there quietly, my heart still hammering. The room had changed. I could feel it in the air, the way people looked at me now, the sudden caution in their voices, the whispered conversations that followed wherever I moved. It wasn't anger or envy. It was something closer to reverence. And that made the silence from my father's side of the room even louder. He didn't return to the microphone again. He simply nodded to a few guests, forced a small smile, and walked off stage with his head slightly bowed. Helen followed him, her hand hovering near his shoulder, but never quite touching it. For the next hour, people came up to me one after another. Admirals, lieutenants, wives of commanders, all offering congratulations, apologies, and the same line. We had no idea. I just smiled and said, It's all right. I never expected you to. Because that was the truth. I'd spent years keeping my work quiet, choosing duty over recognition. But tonight, for the first time, silence had spoken for me. As the evening wore on, I slipped outside onto the balcony. The cool Virginia breeze swept in from the bay, carrying the faint echo of ships' horns in the distance. From where I stood, I could see the reflection of the ballroom lights dancing on the water, like ripples of everything that had just changed. Behind me, I heard the door open. It was my father. He stepped out slowly, his posture no longer the unshakable stance of a captain, but that of an older man suddenly unsure of himself. He stood beside me, resting his hands on the railing, staring at the water. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was the faint hum of the Navy band playing, Eternal Father, Strong to Save, inside. Finally, he cleared his throat. I didn't know, he said quietly. I know, I replied. I should have, he continued, but I didn't. I never thought, he exhaled. All these years, I thought you were chasing a name, a title. I didn't realize you were living. The one thing I always preached, honor. I didn't say anything. The stars reflected off the water between us, like the medals neither of us could see, but both had earned. He turned to face me. Why didn't you tell me, Sarah? I looked at him. Would you have listened? He flinched. I guess not. I didn't want to embarrass you, I said softly. That's why I kept my work quiet. You always said service wasn't about glory. It was about doing your duty, even when no one notices. I tried to live by that. I just never expected it to cost me my father. He stared at me for a long moment, eyes glistening. You didn't lose me. I think I lost you. A long silence followed. He looked back toward the water, his voice breaking slightly. I used to tell your mother that I wanted you to grow up strong. I didn't want life to make you soft. I didn't realize I was the one doing the hurting. Something inside me softened then. I stepped closer, placing a hand on the railing next to his. You taught me discipline, Dad. You taught me to stand tall when people underestimate me. Those lessons got me through every deployment, every mission, every night I thought I wouldn't make it back. You did make me strong. You just forgot to be proud of it. He gave a shaky laugh. You sound just like your mother. For a while, we stood in silence. The ballroom lights reflected in his eyes. Then he whispered. When Peterson started talking, I felt my throat close up. Not because I was ashamed of what I said, though I was, but because I realized how small I'd made you in my mind. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Turns out I was the disappointment. I shook my head. No, Dad. You were just being who you were taught to be. The Navy didn't make space for people like me, not back then. You couldn't see what wasn't part of your world yet. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. He turned toward me, studying my face. You've changed, he said quietly. So have you, I said. At least tonight you have. A faint smile crossed his face. Do you think people will remember me as the man who mocked his own daughter? I smiled sadly. No, they'll remember you as the man who raised her. That's enough. We stood there a little longer, watching as the ballroom slowly emptied. The admiral came out at one point to say goodnight. He saluted me, then offered my father a quiet handshake. Good night, Captain, he said, and congratulations on raising one of the finest officers I've ever served with. My father could barely answer. He just nodded, jaw tight, eyes shining. When we were alone again, he sighed deeply. I don't deserve you, Sarah. I smiled faintly. You don't have to, you just have to try. He nodded slowly, then looked back at the water. I don't say this easily, he began, but I'm proud of you. I've been wrong about a lot of things. Maybe it's time I start learning from my daughter instead of trying to teach her. I felt the sting behind my eyes but held it. Together. That's all I ever wanted. He turned to go, then paused. You paid for tonight, didn't you? I hesitated, then nodded. He chuckled softly. Figures. You always were the one keeping things afloat. When he left, I stayed on the balcony a little longer. The harbor was quiet now, only the rhythmic sound of the tide brushing against the pier. For years, I had carried anger like a weapon, invisible but sharp. But in that moment, it dulled into something else. Peace. Because real revenge isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about living long enough and well enough for the truth to speak for itself. Inside, the Navy band began packing up their instruments. One of the sailors passing by stopped and saluted me. Ma'am, he said quietly, that was something to see. I returned the salute. Thank you, petty officer. When I finally left the hall, I passed the podium where my father had stood. I touched it lightly, then whispered to no one in particular, "Good night, Dad." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look back. The following morning, Norfolk was drenched in sunlight, the kind of golden light that makes the world look almost forgiving. I woke early, my mind still replaying the night before, the speeches, the silence, the admiral's voice cutting through a lifetime of misunderstanding. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on the porch of the small apartment I'd rented near the harbor. Across the water, I could see the outlines of ships preparing for departure. Sailors moving briskly, horns echoing. It always gave me peace to watch them. There was order in that chaos, purpose in every motion. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, a message from my father, just one line. "Breakfast, same diner, 9 another." I smiled faintly. He hadn't said please. Old habits die hard, but the fact that he'd asked it all meant something. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into the diner we used to visit when I was a kid. It still smelled like burnt coffee and buttered toast, the kind of place where the waitresses called everyone honey. My father was already there, sitting in his usual booth, back straight, reading the newspaper out of habit rather than interest. When he saw me, he folded the paper neatly and gave a small nod. "Commander," he said. I smiled. "Captain." He grinned, the first genuine one I'd seen from him in years. "Guess we can drop the ranks now, just Dad is fine." We ordered our usual, black coffee for him, scrambled eggs for me. For a while, we just sat there, eating quietly. It was awkward at first, like two soldiers trying to readjust after years of radio silence. Then he spoke. "You know," he began, "after everyone left last night, I stayed behind to help Helen gather the things. The staff was still talking about you. They called you the quiet one who surprised the whole damn room." I chuckled. "Guess I inherited that from you. You always said a good officer doesn't need to shout." He nodded. "You learned that lesson better than I ever did." For a moment, he looked out the window at the docked ships. "Peterson called me this morning. He said I should have been bragging about you years ago. Told me I'd been blind." I sipped my coffee. He didn't have to say that. "I think he wanted me to hear it," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life chasing recognition, medals, ranks, commendations. And you've been earning it quietly without needing applause. That's what real service looks like." I see that now. I watched him carefully. His voice carried the same authority as always, but beneath it was something new, humility. It looked strange on him, but it fit. He cleared his throat. "I want to make something clear, Sarah. I wasn't mocking you last night because I didn't care. I did it because I didn't understand you. You've always scared me a little. How sure you are of yourself, how certain you seem. I mistook that for arrogance." I smiled gently. "You taught me that confidence is survival, Dad." He gave a gruff laugh. "Yeah, I guess I did. Just didn't expect it to turn out better on you than it did on me." For the first time, he reached across the table and put his hand over mine. It was rough, calloused, but warm. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not because of last night, but because you never stopped showing up, even when I didn't deserve it." The words hit harder than any medal I'd ever received. I squeezed his hand. That's all I ever wanted to hear. We sat there a long while after that, talking about everything we'd avoided for years. Mom's passing, his remarriage, David's career, the missions I could talk about and the ones I couldn't. There was laughter, even a few tears, but no more walls. For the first time, we were two people meeting in the middle, not officer and subordinate, just father and daughter. As I was leaving, he called after me. "Sarah," I turned. "Next time you get one of those medals," he said with a grin, "don't forget to tell me. I'd like to brag properly for once." I laughed. "You'll be the first to know." Outside, the air smelled of salt and redemption. That evening, I took a walk along the pier. The sun dipped below the horizon, setting the sky on fire in shades of orange and gold. Seagulls circled lazily above, and the water glimmered with that familiar rhythm, the rhythm of endings that also sound like beginnings. I thought about how easy it would have been to let bitterness win, to hold on to the humiliation, to the anger. But life had taught me something the Navy never could, that the greatest victories don't come from destroying your enemies, but from healing the people who once wounded you. Some battles you win by standing tall, others you win by sitting down, listening, and forgiving. Before heading home, I stopped by the officers' club one last time. The ballroom was empty now, the tables cleared, the floor polished. But on the podium, someone had left a small envelope with my name written on it. Inside was a note in my basi, father's handwriting. For all the times I didn't salute you when I should have. Dad. There was a single Navy challenge coin taped to the bottom. His coin, the one he'd carried through 3 deployments. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, not just of metal, but of legacy, forgiveness, and understanding. Sometimes honor doesn't come from the medals we wear, but from the people who finally see us for who we are. That night, as I set the coin on my desk beside my own, I thought about what I would tell anyone who still carried the same ache I once did. Those who had spent years trying to prove themselves to someone who refused to see. You don't have to shout. You don't have to fight for acknowledgement. Just keep doing the right thing, the honorable thing. Because in time, truth doesn't just reveal itself. It stands at attention. And when it does, you'll realize that revenge isn't about making them hurt. It's about showing them, and yourself, that you never needed their permission to rise. So, to anyone listening out there, whether you're a veteran, a parent, a daughter, or someone who's just trying to make peace with their past, remember this: honor isn't given, it's lived. And forgiveness is the final act of courage. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, share it. Someone out there might need to hear it. And if you've ever been underestimated, keep walking tall. The world always catches up.